This week I'm doing a Bill Alexander painting, and I've got my checklist here to make sure I've got everything just about right. So, canvas, check. Paints, check. Lederhosen, sure I don't need that. Hello, welcome back to the studio. If you watch Bob's paintings and ever wonder where his inspiration came from, you need to look for a man called Bill Alexander. Now, Bill was Bob's mentor. He was the man who really got him started with wet-on-wet painting techniques. And if you've never seen Bill, then you're in for a treat. What a charismatic person he was. A really strong German accent, but such energy and passion for painting. Check out some of his videos on YouTube. They're absolutely wonderful. I thought, it's about time I had to go at painting one. I did one a while back, but this is number 2 for me. And I'm a complete novice when it comes to painting the way Bill painted. So I have to learn as I go along. So you know the routine. Sit back, relax, notepad at the ready, and see how I did with this Bill Alexander painting. Happy painting, people.
So here's my canvas, 16 by 20. This time I have it portrait, which is in the upright position. I've also put in some pins. This will be my horizon line. I used my brush to measure. The first thing I'm going to do is give it a nice thin even coat of this, Bob Ross liquid white. I have some in a small airtight container, but pay careful attention to this. It needs to be stirred every time you use it. It's very oily and it'll soon separate out. I'll use my palette knife to make sure it's well mixed. This Bob Ross liquid white needs to be applied very thinly and scrubbed in well to the canvas. I finish off with long flat strokes to even it out and test it with my fingertips. Notice I'm looking for a nice thin coating, not too thick. That's about right. I want to use this 1-inch brush again, but it's full of liquid white, so don't forget, give it a nice dry clean on a paper towel. All that liquid white will get you in trouble otherwise. Here's my palette. Not too many colours today. My first colour is going to be Prussian blue. I'm following the original painting by Bill Alexander from The Magic of Oil Painting. It's book 162. Bill's painting had a very loose, open sky. Just some nice sweeping clouds in the background. The liquid white will do for the clouds, so I just need to put in some sky between. I keep it nice and open and light. Once I've done a little, I'll reload my brush and maybe do a little more. When it comes to doing reflections, remember they can be a little darker than the sky above, so I'll apply a little more colour. And I'll try and do something similar in terms of its shape. I'll finish off with some nice loose flat brush strokes just to even things out. And I'll be ready for the mountain. Bill Alexander's books have no written instructions for the paint mixes, unlike Bob Ross's books, which are absolutely packed with information. So my version is all guesswork. I'm going to start with some Prussian blue and a little bit of alizarin crimson. I want this to be slightly more to the lavender side. I'll give that a try. There, after a good mix up, I'll take a small amount and just mark out the position of the mountain peaks. I like to plan my paintings in advance. I like to know where the biggest peak is going to be and then position smaller peaks to the left and right of it. Notice I want them all at slightly different positions. I then use the point of my palette knife just to join the dots. I'll stand back and make some small adjustments later on as the painting develops. So this really is just a bit of an idea. I'm going to take another small roll of lavender paint to block in the shape of my mountain. Now remember, this is a little different to the way Bob does it. I'm doing it the way Bill Alexander does it. He uses a palette knife and he just sort of, smooshes it into the canvas. By doing this, you actually just create a nice stain of colour, but with no thick heavy paint. The main thing is to get a nice dark top to the peaks and to thin down the paint as we get towards the base of the mountain, down towards the horizon line. As I go, I make small adjustments to my mountain, adding little peaks and details as I need them. All the time, I'm just thinning down the paint. Here, the 2 peaks on the right I want to be further back in my painting. I'll I'll darken them a little more, make a few more adjustments to them, but they're actually going to live behind this line of the main peak. I finish off scrubbing in that colour with my palette knife, all the time removing the surplus paint. Take note, I haven't used a brush to brush any of this out at all. Now, let's start making some highlight and some shadow. For my highlight, I want white with a touch of bright red to make a pinkish colour. Do you think that looks a bit too pink? We'll see in a minute. For my shadow, I want to take some white and a little bit of my mountain colour. Make sure this isn't too pale. I want there to be a good difference between these three colours. I want my highlight to look nice and bright, my base colour to look nice and dark, and my shadow colour to look nice and shadowy. I think this combination will work well. Let's start with some shadow colour, just a small roll to start with. Now, my light is in the top right hand side, so it means all my shadows are going to fall to the left. I think I've overdone it a bit with this colour. I put too much on my palette knife. I want a bit more of my dark mountain colour peeking through, so I'll make some adjustments to that in a moment. You see, I just picked up just a little bit too much paint on my palette knife. So let's remove some. And add back some of the original dark base colour. Before you know it, there it is, fixed. But there was a reason why I did this. It'll become more apparent in just a moment. Let's add some highlight. A nice loose touch and some of that titanium white tinted with a drop of red. There you see, it doesn't look pink at all. Remember, just let the knife float gently down the mountain and let the paint break. I add a little touch to this mountain peak as well. Top tip, make sure your snow goes right to the edge of the mountain. You don't want a black outline. Now then, this is the reason why I put that dark colour back in the rear mountain. I wanted it to push that mountain peak back and to make this snowy highlight show up in front. You've got to be thinking one step ahead when you're painting sometimes. I'll continue adding highlights and shadows across my mountain, always thinking about the direction the knife should travel. In this case, a little bit more downward than across. I want these to look like quite steep mountains in the background of my scene. As you build up layers in your mountain, you'll see opportunities to add little details. Like this, I want to add a little extra ridge. I put in some shadow and then top it off with a little bit of highlight. And before you know it, you've created a whole new feature on your mountain. One easy way to add a little extra detail back into your mountain is to do what I'm doing now. Use the small blade of your knife and just some of the original base colour. Just a few dark areas here and there really help your mountain stand out. In Bill's original painting, the base of the mountain is enveloped in mist. I'm using a nice 1-inch brush, tapped firmly into some titanium white paint. Make sure you spread those bristles open nice and wide. Let's have a closer look. There, all open and lacy, not clogged together. Now, just tap in that misty layer. Think about where the next layer of the painting must be. We've got some fir trees to come in next. You also don't want to go too high up the mountain and take away some of the lovely snowy details. Do a little and stand back. Do a little and stand back again. See where you need to leave a little shadow at the sides as well. I might even want to add a second layer of mist. To finish this layer off, I want a delicate upward stroke with my brush. Here you see I barely touch the canvas, I just want to dissolve some of those really sharp edges here. The idea is just to move the paint enough to create that lovely misty effect. Finger and thumb is all I use to hold the brush. Just a few dabs is all it takes. I've looked closely at Bill's original painting and realised that there's some watery effects going on in the background. It sort of links the distant mountain to the midground. So right back here on the horizon line, I want to just drop in the suggestion of a bit of distant water, a few ripples maybe. Try and keep these nice and level. I have a tendency to let them droop to the right a little bit. I think I'm okay today.
So here's my painting so far, and I think it's coming on rather nicely. I've got a nice misty layer underneath, but it's time to look at doing some fir trees. Now for this particular painting, Bill Alexander used to use a 1-inch brush, and he used to bring it to a nice tapered end. So I thought, let's have a look at my brushes and see which one I'm going to choose. This one is a little bit more worn, and this one is a lot newer. And it'll be the newer brush, of course, that I want to pick. It's got some nice long soft bristles, and I think it will come to a nice tapered end with a bit less effort. The paint will stick this together and make a nice tree shape, whereas this slightly portly one, that's a bit more worn down, a little bit more sort of crunchy, will tend to sort of split apart and be very hard to use. So look through your brush collection and see if you can find one like this, more supermodel and less sort of portly, like someone else I know.
I've tidied up my palette before moving on to the next step, fir trees. For this, I guess that probably Bill used the original lavender colour and added some Van Dyke brown, which will go a sort of greenish tone, then topped it up with a little sap green. We want a lovely dark deep green colour for fir trees. Now, let's use a nice 1-inch brush, groomed well through the paint, give it a little wiggle. I want these bristles to really stick together. I'm looking for a chiselled edge. Not bad, nearly chiselled. I think it'll work okay. Let's think about where the land needs to be first. I always think of this looking like a bird's beak. About 3/4 of the way across the canvas, and then bring it back quite straight. And drop in the position of one of the fir trees. But there's a problem. I've managed to line it right up with the top of that piece of mist. A few touches of the brush and I'll just make it climb through that line. While I'm here, I'll add 3 or 4 more. Now, pay careful attention. I tip my brush at a slight angle and start dabbing. As I come down the tree, I tip my brush at a slightly steeper angle. I appear to be having more luck with the left-hand side of this tree than the right. Well, I'm not used to this style of painting. I'm learning as I go. We'll see in a moment that the more of these trees I do, the better at it I get. Quick fix though, and I think that looks quite a fir tree-like. Here I've swung my camera round to the side for you. Hopefully you'll get a better angle. You see, I'm just starting to tip my brush out a little further, till eventually it's horizontal. Once again, that right hand side of my tree didn't look quite as good as the left hand side. I'll have to do a bit of work on it. Just a few touches though. There we are. An easy fix. This is a fun way of painting fir trees. You might want to give it a try sometime. Let's see if fir tree number 5 is better than the previous ones. I'll start on the right, tipping the brush outward. So far so good. Looking good. Going well. Time for a celebratory cup of tea nearly. Yes, I think I've cracked it. Practice makes progress. Whilst I've got that dark colour on my brush, I think I'll pull in some reflections. Just grab and pull straight down. Try and sort of match the size of the trees above. So longer reflections for taller trees. There we are. I think we're just about there. Now I'll pick up a nice clean brush and we'll do some across brush strokes. But hold on. Maybe I'm not ready yet. I have some more detail to include. Hold your horses. I've got some cadmium yellow and sap green for my highlights. Bill's favourite was lemon yellow, a slightly more sort of citrus colour, a little brighter than the one I've got, but I can always add some white to mine to make it really sparkle. You see, I toned it down with a little bit of that base colour from the original fir trees. Once again, bring your brush to a nice chiseled edge, then very gently touch the edge of the trees. Top tip, knock off some of that dark colour that you pick up on the edge of your brush. It'll save you contaminating your nice highlight colours too quickly. Remember where the light's coming from, strongly from the right, so the centre and left of your tree should be getting progressively darker. Here you see I deliberately make one tree overlap another. I'll leave that dark one in the background though. Move your trees around in your painting with your highlights. I've got this lovely dark area at the base of the fir trees left for some bushes. Again, just the same highlight colour, but I added a tiny drop of titanium white and liquid white to my colour. I wanted this to be a real eye catcher. It doesn't take much to make those bushes really stand out. And while I'm at it, I'll add a little bit of colour into the reflections too. I looked more closely at Bill's original painting and saw that he even added a little bit of red into the tops of those bushes for some flowers. So I'll do the same too. Now finally, we're ready to brush across. But hang on, I still have more to do. Let's put in a riverbank. I spread my Van Dyke brown nice and thin and pick up a small roll of colour. Between the base of the bushes and the reflections, I add in where I want the riverbank to be. Lots of nice texture here. It'll make it easier for the highlights to stick. Just a little touch under this bank too. I'm sticking to Bill's original palette of colours, but it does limit my options somewhat when it comes to highlighting these rocks. Some white Van Dyke brown and maybe a little of that lavender colour is what I've got to choose from. Again, a small roll, a very light touch, and just let the paint graze across the Van Dyke brown. Where it touches, it sticks, and where it doesn't, it stays on the palette knife to the next rock. Leave plenty of dark, don't overdo it. Remember, it's the dark bits that really give this painting its sort of character. But I do like to throw in one or two really bright rocks to give you a little bit of a focal point on the far bank. It's a neat touch, one you should try on your own paintings. For an added touch of detail, I use a nice clean dry 1-inch brush and just carefully grab the very last edge of those rocks, pull down for the reflections, and then finally, yes, you can brush across. Here's another neat trick. If you want to get that nice little wobble in the water effect, pull nice long brush strokes right the way across the canvas. If you stop short, you might leave a dirty mark on the painting. There, I think it gives a nice effect. And finally, a waterline. I just tap my knife into some of that grubby titanium white paint. I find it easier to do than using liquid white. It tends to get a bit more smudgy. Just touch, firm pressure, really press into the canvas and slide the knife along. Keep it level. Here, I go between the rock and the reflection. And I think it gives my painting a nice finish. Not that one, it's a bit wonky. I corrected it though. I'll add a few more little touches of detail to the water. And maybe a few scratchy sticks and twigs in the background. This is an easy way of creating lots more trees and detail, also to give your fir trees a nice pointy tip.
So my paint is coming on rather nicely, but I can't help feeling I need an extra colour. I need a little accent colour here because everything's getting a little bit sort of samey. And you might find this when you're doing your own paintings, that if you've picked maybe 4 or 5 colours and you've painted the entire painting with the same tones of greens and browns and yellows throughout, it starts to look a bit sort of plain and ordinary looking. This is when adding one additional colour to your palette can make such a difference. But it really needs to be one colour, not 3 or 4, because that we can turn into a bit of a colour fest if you can't really decide where to put all these colours. So I suggest doing the same technique as I've used here. Paint it all the way through and then just add one extra colour. For me, well, you'll see what I'm going to add to my painting, but it gives it a real extra lift. On with the painting.
For the small trees on the right, I start by taking a roll of Van Dyke brown and touching it to the canvas. This tree passes right over the area of the mountain and that misty area. It's the reason why I didn't overdo it with that white colour. It would have been very hard to make this paint stick. Whilst I'm at it, I'll just make the trunk a little wider. I do that in several stages because I don't want it to get too wide too quickly. I'll give him a little friend as well. To highlight my tree trunks, I take a small amount of titanium white, a little touch of Van Dyke brown. What else can I use? Maybe a touch of green. I don't have many other options. I think I really do need to look at adding another accent colour to my palette. Now, light touch on the knife, touch and pull. Give it a little sort of a rounded action when you do this to make it look like you're painting around the tree trunk. You see, my marble mix gives me a nice variation of colours. For my side branches, I'm using my liner brush with a little tiny drop of odourless thinners into some Van Dyke brown. Notice how I roll my brush and bring it to a nice point. Hold your brush well back. You want to be painting using just the tip of the brush, more like using a pen than a brush. I deliberately angle the branches in different directions. Older branches at the bottom face more 90 degrees to the trunk, and the newer branches face a little more upright. As this tree is going to get some foliage, I don't need much in the way of branches, just a few, just to hold the shape together. I'll add one or two to the bigger tree on the right as well. And there, I think we have the basic tree shapes done. One noticeable difference between the way Bob would paint these trees and the way Bill did it is that Bill didn't put any underpainting under the foliage. He just went straight against the sky. It makes things, well, not quite so easy sometimes to stand away from the background. Let's see how we get on. I'm going to use the same 1-inch brush I used for my background fir trees. I've loaded the brush nicely with some paint. I'm going to paint just using the corner of the brush. Notice I tip onto just one edge and tap. It leaves a nice imprint of the tips of the bristles. As I go down, I touch the trunk here and there, picking up a little brown. It sort of gives me a bit of an underpainting to work with. I think though my colour is a little on the pale side, and for it to stand out against that pale sky, I need to darken it slightly. Make little changes and variations to your colours when you're painting your own trees. They don't all have to be one shade of green. We want many shades of green. It makes them look more realistic. If you've seen any of my videos, you know that my often repeated advice is to stand back frequently. When I stand back, all I can see is, well, tree trunks. I think I'll add a little touch of foliage across the centre line of the trees. I think that looks a little bit better. I'm going to add some foliage to the base of my trees, much the same as I did on the far riverbank, so I'll use a little bit of time-lapse for this. I'll use a small amount of Van Dyke brown just to add the suggestion of a bank on this side of the painting. Once again, a small roll of paint just gently dragged across the canvas is all we need to create a dark understain. I'll add a few highlights to these bushes, and I think that'll really do it for our painting, but I still can't help feeling that there's something missing. I definitely think I need to add another colour to my palette. I think I need to add maybe some yellow ochre. I think this will give my painting a real lift. Let's see. I'm going to add a touch to this riverbank, and instantly these rocks come alive. I wonder if it would work on the other side of my painting. Well, let's add some. I think if you only have it in one spot, it looks a little strange. But I think I could also overdo it. So some on the riverbanks and some on the tree trunks maybe. Anywhere else? No, I think I'll hold tight there. I'm going to add a few extra scratchy sticks and twigs to my painting, and maybe a waterline on this near riverbank. Just a little bit in here. And finally, a signature. I think my Bill Alexander painting has been rather successful and one I really enjoyed painting, and I hope you paint it as well.
So there we have it. A Bill Alexander painting by me, of course. But don't move, there's another lovely Bill Alexander painting coming right along.